The story of Allan Legere, also known as the Monster of the Miramichi, is one of the most chilling and infamous crime sprees in Canadian history. Between 1986 and 1989, Legere terrorized the small communities along the Miramichi River in New Brunswick, Canada, committing brutal murders, arson, and assaults. Allan Legere was born on February 13, 1948, in the rural community of Chatham Head, New Brunswick. Raised in a troubled and impoverished home, Legere experienced a difficult childhood marked by instability and abuse. As he grew older, he developed a reputation as a bully and troublemaker, often clashing with local authorities. Legere's early criminal record included petty thefts, break-ins, and assaults, which escalated in severity over time. His inability to conform to societal norms and his violent tendencies foreshadowed the horrifying acts he would later commit. Allan Legere's descent into infamy began on June 21, 1986, when he and two accomplices, Scott Curtis and Todd Matchett, broke into the home of John and Mary Glendenning in the small community of Black River Bridge, New Brunswick. The Glendenning couple, both in their 60s, owned a small convenience store and were well loved by their community. The trio planned to rob the Glendennings, but the situation quickly escalated. Legere brutally beat and tortured John Glendenning, leaving him to die of his injuries. Mary was assaulted and left severely traumatized but managed to survive the ordeal. The crime sent shockwaves through the peaceful community. Legere and his accomplices were arrested shortly thereafter. In 1987, Legere was convicted of second-degree murder for John Glendenning's death and sentenced to life in prison. His accomplices received lesser sentences, but for Legere, it seemed like his days of terrorizing the Miramichi were over. However, the nightmare was only beginning. On May 3, 1989, Allan Legere was transported from the Atlantic Institution in Renous, New Brunswick, to a hospital in Moncton for treatment of an ear infection. While in the hospital, Legere managed to overpower a guard, seize his keys, and escape custody. This marked the start of one of Canada's most notorious manhunts. Legere disappeared into the dense forests surrounding the Miramichi River, a region he knew intimately. Over the next 7 months, he embarked on a reign of terror that left the community in a state of fear and disbelief. His crimes during this time were marked by extreme brutality, and he seemed to target vulnerable individuals who lived alone or in remote areas. Legere's spree included a series of 4 murders, all of which shocked the nation. 1. Annie Flam, May 29, 1989. The first victim of Legere's spree was 75-year-old Annie Flam, a widow living alone in Chatham Head. Legere broke into her home, savagely beat her, and set the house on fire to cover his tracks. The charred remains of her body revealed the extent of his cruelty. 2. Nina and Donna Flam, October 13, 1989. Legere's next victims were Nina Flam, 61, and her sister, Donna, 45, who lived together in Newcastle. Legere tortured and killed both women in a frenzied attack. He again set fire to the home, a hallmark of his modus operandi. 3. Father James Smith, November 16, 1989. Legere's final victim was Father James Smith, a beloved priest in the town of Chatham. Legere invaded the rectory where Father Smith lived, brutally beating and strangling him before setting the building ablaze. The murder of a respected clergyman intensified the community's fear and outrage. Legere's crimes had a profound impact on the Miramichi region. The once peaceful community was plunged into a state of paranoia, with residents locking their doors, installing security systems, and avoiding unnecessary outings. His ability to evade capture for months, despite the efforts of law enforcement, added to the public's sense of vulnerability. The media dubbed Legere the Monster of the Miramichi, and his story dominated headlines across Canada. His crimes not only terrorized the Miramichi region but also captured the attention of the entire country. The hunt for Allan Legere was one of the largest and most intense manhunts in Canadian history. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, along with local law enforcement and military personnel, conducted extensive searches of the dense forests and rural areas where Legere was believed to be hiding. Legere proved to be an elusive and cunning fugitive. His knowledge of the local terrain allowed him to evade capture for months, and he often relied on breaking into homes to steal food, clothing, and supplies. Despite the best efforts of law enforcement, he remained at large, continuing his spree of violence and terror. Legere's 7-month reign of terror finally came to an end on November 24, 1989, when he was captured by the RCMP in a wooded area near Miramichi. He was armed and attempted to flee but was subdued by officers. In 1991, Legere stood trial for the murders he committed during his escape. Thanks to advancements in DNA evidence, which was still a relatively new forensic tool at the time, prosecutors were able to link Legere definitively to the crime scenes. He was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Legere was sent to Canada's maximum security penitentiary in Quebec, where he remains to this day.